So it's my pleasure to introduce Jackie, who is the illustrator and author of more than 24 children's books. She lives in a small cottage in Wales, which she shares with her two children, an abundance of cats and dogs, as you can see. And Jackie, we're just delighted to have you join us. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm quite delighted to be here, to be honest. It's quite a thrill. I live in a country that thinks it's far bigger than it actually is. And I think the idea of wilderness, the kind of space that you have is just astonishing. Um, I really need to see some old ancestor trees at some point, um, and feel what it's like to just breathe the air from them.
Mm,
Um, yeah, small islands, Britain is, and I'm right on the edge of it by the sea.
beautiful. Well, I wonder, would you like to start off with a reading, or I also have some questions for you. Where shall we begin?
Um, shall I shall I read? Um,
Great.
my first book with Robert is the Lost Words, and I have some of these by heart, but there are some spells that get left behind and not spoken by anybody. One that I particularly love is Bramble. And I think it kind of speaks very much, although it was written in 2015, maybe 2016, speaks very much of these times that we've been living through. Bramble is on the march again, rolling and arching along the hedges into parks on the city edges. All streets are suddenly thick with briar. Cars snarl fast. Business over. Moths have come in their millions, drawn to the thorns. The air flutters. Bramble has reached each house now, looped it in wire. People lock doors, close shutters. Little shoots steal through keyholes, leave in quiet halls, empty stairwells, bowls of bright berries where the light falls. And yes, it's a big book. I was going to go like that. You can kind of, Rob always says you can use it as a bird hide if you need to. It's a strange time that we're living through where we've all been isolated in our houses, and those of us lucky enough to live in wild places have easy access to it. But nature does get everywhere.
Yes, and I love that image of it coming back to the
Yeah.
deserted places, and that it makes me think actually of this rewilding story about Chernobyl being deserted and now actually being overrun by plants and animals.
Overrun, isn't that amazing? Repopulated. I was trying to imagine what my partner lives in St David's, which is the smallest city in Britain, and I was trying to imagine what the space would have been like before the streets were there,
Mm.
um, and possibly will be like again sometime.
Yes, imagination going both backwards and forwards. I
Yeah.
wonder, something I've wondered about your process of, I'm not an artist. You don't want to see my art. What, for someone who can capture the the beauty, the essence, the character, and the movement of these dynamic beings on the paper. I'm really curious about what your process is of connecting with those animals, those plants, and those landscapes as you start to manifest them on paper.
With the Lost Words, I felt like every piece of work that I'd done before that was a kind of apprenticeship to this book, which I guess while I was doing it, it was part praise song to things that I love. I love wild things. I love wild places. I love the focus that you can get on something as overlooked, but every day as a dandelion. And when you look really, really closely at how the petals of the flowers are, um, which you have to do if you're going to draw something. You have to really observe something very closely. That's kind of what the start of the process is. So drawing is all about looking, seeing, looking at something as if you're looking at it for the first time. Even things like how the thorns sit on brambles, because they're not just spikes that stick up. They have this beautiful shape, like almost like the fin of a porpoise across these wires. So looking, sketching. I do use photography. This is where I have an advantage over my predecessors who worked 200-300 years ago. I love to actually, if I'm going to paint something, I need to have seen it. I need to have stood next to it. I need to have smelt it. And then you have to kind of, for me, I have to kind of inhabit it and become it in order to paint it, which is easier with some things than others. Bears, I find I feel quite bear-like at the best of times. And yeah, observation, always looking. I guess when I'm just kind of absent-mindedly seeming to be staring into space, I'm trying to work out how I would draw something.
What
And
does
it,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you say.
Or with the idea of inhabiting the thing, what is that like? Are you imagining yourself as
Yeah,
there?
you try and clothe yourself in the form of a bear or a dandelion or an otter. Otters, oh, lovely. And when I was a kid, I loved stories about animals. I loved Tarka the Otter, which is one that was very British, set in Devon. The life of a wild otter. There's Ring of Bright Water was much more domestic because that was somebody who had a pet otter. And I didn't want to own an otter. I just wanted to be an otter. I wanted to shape shift. And I guess this is the nearest. This is the nearest I can get to it. Really, is shape shifting into the form of paint. And yeah,
That's so wonderful, and that makes me think about the process. We talk about a lot about rewilding land and letting it follow its own path, but then what does it mean to also rewild ourselves? And I that sounds like an answer to that question of inhabiting, imagining what would it be like if
yeah,
I were an otter? What would I need? What would I delight in? What would
yeah.
be scary?
And the book was an attempt. In the UK, film crews went into schools and talked to kids about, ask them questions about, do you know what this animal is, and do you know what this one? And I was saying to them, don't go into schools, go into offices, talk to the grown-ups, because the reason the kids don't know is because their parents don't know, and their parents aren't teaching them. So the book was an attempt to get, start that sentence again. Books like The Lost Words are meant to be shared between parents and children. It's that time, usually before bed, when parents will sit down with their kids and they'll read them a story. So it was a rewilding of the imagination, I think, is what we were after. Not in the sense of bears and wolves and lions and things that we don't have in the UK, but in the sense of what is on your doorstep, what you can see. So a wren, tiny bird. I went into a school just after the book was published, and before I spoke the wren spell, which starts when wren whirs from stone to furs, the world around her slows, for wren is quick, so quick she blurs the air through which she flows. And I said, does anybody know what a wren is? And not one child in the class put their hand up. But also, the teacher didn't know. So if you don't know, you don't see it. You've not seen that spark of life and thought to yourself, what is that? That curiosity that kids have, what is it? How does it work? What happens if? What's this? If I was that, what would I do? Where does it sleep? How? Kids are just amazing, aren't they? They're just full of all the questions.
Yes.
Some of the answers as well, if we actually listen to them, many of them, they they don't take the kind of nonsense that comes out of the mouths of politicians. They know what the truth is, and they look at us as if to say, "What?" You can see that in all the school strikes. The kids are standing up and going, "No, we haven't got time to wait for you. You've
Yes,
got to
yes,
do something."
yes. That is, your book, your work and Robert's words perfectly straddle, I think, the childhood and the adulthood. Maybe it's this universal capturing of imagination. And I wonder, I really appreciate you drawing that link of children wouldn't be disconnected from the natural world as we hear about in books like Nature Deficit Disorder, Last
Mm,
Child in the Woods. We wouldn't be hearing about that if the adults weren't also disconnected. Um,
mm.
and I'm curious what you think of for environmental educators, for artists, for stewards of the land. How do we bring, maybe the answer is the same for children and adults, maybe it's different, but how do we bring people into that imagination and that love?
I think stories have always been our main um, method for communicating um, facts. Parables are wonderful because they don't spell it all out for you, they let you find it yourself. Um, there's a wonderful quote, I can remember very few, but in Overstory by Richard Powers, he says, "No amount of argument will change a person's mind. It takes a good story to do that." Um, and I think stories that spin around the awe, and awe as in, well, both types of awe. The awe as in something precious, and the awe as in something wonderful, um, are a good way to rewild the heart. Really, um, it's. I think that there are two things. I think if you don't connect with your creativity, it's quite damaging. And I think we have become a sick society because we don't stand with our feet on bare earth enough. We don't look to the skies enough and see birds and what utterly amazing creatures they are. How can you dismiss something that can fly around the world and navigate by the stars and the scent of the earth back to its nest year on year? And we call it bird brained in our arrogance, as if that's an insult. Um, I think we have to have a reassessment of intelligence
Mm,
and also the worth of creatures. They're not some commodity for our exploitation, as once whales were. They are living beings with culture that demand our respect. That's a
beautiful.
minor soapbox I just got on.
I love it. I could not agree more. Um, I was listening recently to an interview with a woman who had written a book on the intersection of animal rights and disability rights, and talking about how by holding one intelligence or body as the norm or the
Mm,
best, then that allows us to subjugate other people and animals and other intelligences by not valuing the vast array of intelligences that are out there in the natural world. And, we might judge this plant by it not being able to read, but we never judge ourselves by not being able to turn the sun into sugar, or not, or
mm.
being able to warn of onslaughts of insects by chemical defenses. We don't have that same kind of respect
Yeah,
for other
yeah.
creatures.
It's an understanding of different intelligences, isn't it, and different languages. I find myself more and more trying to understand the language of birds and not hearing it as music,
Mm,
but trying to understand what's being said.
yes, we are not the only communicators.
Mm,
I've got a wonderful question. from the audience. Oh, and Gail Cameron just commented that she's sitting outside and just had a beautiful fox cross through their yard. So sounds like there's some animal magic sparking here.
Mm.
I've got a question for you here from Kathy, who asks, what in your life journey, especially in your childhood, led you to capture the natural world in such a wondrous, loving manner?
Um, my dad um, used to take me for walks and show me how to find birds' nests, and um, I think birds was my first kind of outside of myself. You know, when you're a child and you kind of everything is kind of about you in a way, and yet you're very powerless because you have no control over what's happening and get bossed around a lot. But I remember catching that bright eye of a bird and seeing another being looking back at me. And also I saw my dad drawing once. It's not something that he did very often, but it seemed like such magic to see how he made marks on a piece of paper and a lapwing appeared. And I just loved that. And that's what I wanted to do. But that's what I've always been drawn to, is animals, not people.
And right before everyone joined us, you were saying that you were working on a little sketch right now, right? Oh,
While we were chatting, yeah,
wow.
I have a habit of doodling when I'm talking to people, but I had to paint a birthday card for my friend and I was running out of time, so I did a card.
Oh,
But I
that's
thought this one, when you do the draw for the book, I can this one can go with it as well. This little
oh
dancing otter.
wow. That's incredible. Phenomenal. So one of you lucky guests will also receive a hand doodled otter by Jackie from this very moment. Um,
I've stopped doodling now. I've run out of paper.
well, you're
Concentrating.
certainly able to do both. Another question I had for you is about the nature of the spell idea of speaking the words, of giving them life through
Mhm.
breath, and that's something that differentiates poetry from prose, of the way it sounds as we vocalize it. Um, and I'm curious about your thoughts on the importance of spells and speaking things alive, and then how that interacts with image or the accompaniment of the art.
It's a long answer to this one.
Great.
This when Robert and I first started working, he was writing, and I've worked for many years in books for children, books for young people, and I'm aware that most of the books that I was doing were being bedtime stories, and they're read aloud. So always I would read them to the cats. The cats very indifferent to my writing. They're not very impressed, but it's quite good to have an audience. You can see now they're like, it's completely dismissive. Uh, Thank you, as if on cue. A nice yawn. Um, it's something about how the words taste in the ear. And so I guess a lot of picture books are quite poetic. Robert came up with the idea of writing acrostic poetry. When I told one of my friends this, she was horrified because she hated acrostics, and I was going, "Yeah, but
Oh,
this will be different. This is Robert, so it'll be fine." Um,
Jack,
and
I think we froze for a quick moment.
mhm.
You dropped right after you said Robert came up with the idea.
Robert came up with the idea of acrostic poems, and that's a different kind of spelling as well, because it spells out with the first letter of each line the creature. It's really good for me because I had to learn some of them. Usually when I paint an otter, I recite the otter spell, and it's a really good way of learning it because you know the first letter for each stanza. Um, and a spell to conjure back the creature into the minds and into the mouths and into the hearts of people. A strange thing then happened. The artwork went into an exhibition, which is still touring. And people were going in and saying, oh, I stood in front of the otters and I read the otter spell 3 times. And 2 days later, I saw my first ever otter. And the other day, a lady said, oh, I've been listening to the goldfinch song. Never had a goldfinch in my garden before, and now I've got some. So it's like they're kind of, are they calling things in, or are people noticing?
Mm.
It's called frequency illusion if you're pedant, and it's called magic if you have an imagination that is a bit fanciful.
I like the latter, and I've noticed that myself after learning how to identify a new tree or a new plant. Suddenly it
You see
appears
it. Yeah, you see
everywhere.
it. Yeah, everywhere. And yes, it has that kind of feeling. I know certainly when I was working on the book, it felt really uncanny that when I was doing the wrens, I would walk up the hill and there would be it was almost as if a little wren was following me up through the bushes. And then I was down at the beach and underneath my van in a place where never has ever a wren been before, there was a little wren hopping along as if to say, I don't know why you're walking on the beach. You're supposed to be home painting me. Um, that was uncanny. Painting daisies. I had to get the paintings for the daisies done in the winter, and daisies are a summer flower. But I did find some. I found enough to make a daisy chain that I could paint. Just these little wild gifts, as if the natural world conspired to help, which was rather lovely.
That's so lovely. It's as if they're directly there. They wanted to be a part of
Yeah,
pages.
yeah.
I have another question for you from the audience. One from Richard. Are there particular species of plants or wildlife that are especially totemic to you? So many of your creatures are magic that it's hard to tell if any stand out as a particularly special relationship to you. And I'm going to show a few of those images because I'm getting a request to show a little bit more of the images.
I do love a fox. And I've been learning the shape of a fox recently for a big performance that we did. There's a fox on the Bluebell page. That's my dandelion, which was outside my house. Owls are rather beautiful. I love painting otters, but I can never quite get the shape right. I love wolves. I've only met wolves in captivity in the UK and once in Seattle. And bears have always had a fascination for me, and the First Nation stories of bears, and the understanding of each creature, each thing having a soul and a spirit. Foxes, I've said foxes, herons. I always know it's going to be a good day if I see a heron. Good things happen. There's been a few around at the moment. I also do quite love the seasonal changes. So at the moment, we've just got cuckoos coming and wheat ears and stone chats are around and the swallows arrived. And every year my heart lifts a bit more when the swallows come back. And we notice they're coming more than we notice they're going, I think.
Yeah, I love your emphasis on the importance of seeing and noticing those changes. Sometimes
Yeah,
I
yeah, it's good rhythm, I think. And we've lost it. When I was a child, strawberries were summer fruit, and there was much more of a seasonal vegetable thing going on. I think our way of life has kind of lost that connection. Maybe it's something we need to get back to.
In terms of following the seasons with our lifestyles.
Yes, and foods. Also, I do think need to open our windows more, because double glazing is not good for bird song. You kind of hush the outside, and walk in the rain. Walking in the rain can be good. Have a bit of weather.
Yeah, yeah. When thinking about the rewilding ourselves, it's that's sort of the rewilding the body part, the
Yeah,
heart and the imagination, and then the body is the willingness to be out in the weather, be
yeah.
cold, wet.
Nighttime is good. I Until I moved to my house, I hadn't realised what moon shadows really were, and how they change with each lunar month. So when you've got a full moon, you've got a crisp shadow. Um, and I had the amazing good fortune once of be wandering around at night with my dogs, and it was raining, and there was a moonbow, which was like a rainbow, but it was made from moonlight. And now I just want to see that again. Just, I thought, how did I get to 46 without seeing a moonbow? And then I realized that I was not often daft enough to wander around in the rain and the dark.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that gets back to the precision of looking with the art,
Mm,
not only how closely you're looking, but when and um, where you're looking, or what time
yeah.
you might be willing to go out and look.
Yeah.
I've got another lovely question from an audience member, from Lauren. For the vanished words panels in the lost words, which I'll hold up in a moment, with all of the hidden letters, uh, they're just as delightful as the poem portrait pairings. And how did the idea come for those in particular?
How did the idea come? Mr. McFarlane, who does the words, said, let's do this book as triptychs. He said, the first spread can be the absence of something. The second spread will be the acrostic and then the icon image. And the third spread brings it back into the landscape. And I went, oh, that's how do you paint something that isn't there? That's quite difficult. So after trying, he said, "Oh, just do a landscape without an otter in it." And I thought, well, I can see that any day, can't I? You kind of look out the window and there's no otter there. There's quite a few other things that aren't there as well. And then I realized actually that it was the words were missing from language, not from landscape. You know, there's still bluebells there, there's still adders there. It's our language that where they dropped from, and there are 26 letters in the alphabet. So I thought, what if you kind of threw them across a page and then spelled again out the word that comes next, and then try and couple that with a painting that depicts in some sense an absence. And they were the most interesting pages to find the answers for, in a way, to paint not an otter. And in some ways, the otter one is too present, because it's the breath of an otter in water and the otter's just gone. Some work more successfully than others. Originally with the adder one, I painted a skin that had been sloughed off, but I remember getting partway through the painting and taking photographs, sending it to Robert and saying, this isn't working, it's not working. And I'd painted the kind of ferns that are on that page. And it was him who suggested that we took the skin away and just had the patterns with the shape where a snake might have been. That's my favorite page in the book, that one with the little bubbles.
This
I
one,
had,
breath
Yeah,
page.
otter breath in bubbles. Yes.
And I did not know that that was what that was until
Yeah.
this very moment.
That's fine, and that kind of doesn't matter in a way. It's one of the things that stories that I love that came out of it was as small children they'll touch each letter to spell it out, touch it with their finger, and then they'll also look for their own name in the letters. But there was a little boy who touched the letters Otter. His name's Otto as well. So he touched each letter, and then he turned the page, and he thought that his touching of the letters had made the next page happen. And that is like real magic. That's the magic of books. And then he spoke the spell, and his speaking of the spell then made the next page happen. And without him doing that, it couldn't be. And you can't design a book for that to happen. But isn't that just wonderful that it was that literal literacy and the
That's
touch,
wonderful.
touching with his eyes and with his finger and with his heart as well. Just gorgeous.
That real inhabiting.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And the there is such interaction with the book. Like I feel like there's a back and forth happening with this book of finding the letters of I also must confess it was only I've had this book for a while, and only recently did I realize that it was
An
acrostic poetry.
acrostic, yeah, yeah.
Usually reading acrostic poems, I have found them, they're sort of obvious, and
Mm,
these ones are just so smooth. I had no idea
mm.
until seeing one of them and noticing, oh, this one is an acrostic poem, and then just realizing, oh,
Oh,
wait,
they all are. Isn't that amazing? And with the lost spells, some of them are and some of them aren't. So we changed with this book. It obviously changed its size as well. So it's called the Little Sister to the Lost Words. So some are acrostics, and then others are spell poems. But one of the things that all credit to our publisher, there's no kind of introduction that tells you how the book works. You have to just find it out for yourself. And I love that because so much is spelled out for us these days. Um, it's really lovely when somebody has the courage to just go, no, let's just see. And
mm,
children get it first because they look more.
it does.
Some adults never get it.
And I think probably most people attending are familiar with the concept of just that these words had vanished
Mm,
from the the Children's Oxford Dictionary, and
mm,
so that these incantations, these words, and these images are to re-embody them in
mm.
our collective memory as humans, and to also sort of put a spell out into the world to ensure they don't get lost not only from our language but from the landscape as well.
Yeah. Can I tell you a secret about this one?
Oh, please do.
This is Daisy that you might not have noticed, but you might have. There's a word for this, and I can't remember what it is. But with this one, which is an acrostic, the last word of the line chimes chain-like with the first of the next one. So if you listen, Daisy, the daisy, ten a penny chain maker, acre upon acre of tiny suns turns skyward. I would braid you into a bracelet and coronet, necklace and ring, sing of you as jewels of the meadow, gems of the lawn, yawning open every dawn, closing up each dusk. Daisy, the daisy. So the words actually make a daisy chain as well.
Oh, wow.
That's a bit clever.
It's pretty clever.
It's a cunning trick, that is.
I love that
Yes.
one.
Yeah. I love its quiet simplicity. And I do love the way the daisies, when I got up this morning, they were shut and then they opened up their eyes.
That little winking. I've got another question about from guest Sue, who wonders why you started using gold leaf in your work.
Um, a long time ago, started using it. I like icons, and I love some Japanese and Chinese paintings, big screens that have a lot of space and gold leaf. I still remember the very first one that I tried was a small painting of a woman and a bear. Um, and I tried loose leaf. Loose leaf is really difficult to use. It's so thin, and you have to be quite skilled to pick it up and place it in the right place. And I discovered there's a thing called transfer leaf, which is still gold leaf, but you can actually wave it around in the air, and it's really easy to use. But the reason I used it in the Lost Words was because I wanted to, I'm not sure whether iconify is a word, but I wanted to make icons of these acorns and birds and creatures. Because to me they are sacred. Um, I guess that's where my religion lies,
Mm.
in a wild thing.
And when you say sacred and icon, what does that mean to you? And what delineates something that feels sacred in nature?
Oh gosh, that's a.
Or is all nature sacred? Is there a difference there?
I don't think there is. I see an equality in everything. Um, Gosh, that's the biggest question I've ever been asked. I think it's a feeling that you have, isn't it? A feeling of reverence for things. Um, a feeling of spirit. I do know that when I was young and I was taken to Sunday school, there was a lot that didn't sit right in my head. The main thing being that stewardship that we were supposed to have over everything, that kind of that pyramid structure with different life forms and us on the top. It's just like, just I remember thinking, oh, really? And at the time, I guess the man was slightly taller than the woman, slightly like a lot. That's another story, isn't it? Um, I remember the world first beginning to make sense to me when I discovered the myths of First Nation people, where everything has a spirit, and there was more connectivity between people and trees, and more respect. Um, Not in a sentimental way, but yeah. And I guess I'm still trying to understand it. Really, think
Yeah.
that's as much as my brain can cope with at this time of night.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with that. I really resonated with that.
Mm,
That's just beautiful, and I think a lot of, why people connect so deeply with your books and are showing up here today is that ineffable character, that feeling.
yeah, hard to explain some things. Just have
Yeah,
to draw them.
exactly. And that actually leads me to one of my final questions. I'm wondering if you could share with us what you think uh, art offers, and art in a broad sense. It doesn't have to be painting specifically, or it can be
Mm,
that some other ways of knowing. We just talked about the valuing of different intelligences between species. I think often, science or math is often valued higher than art. Um, but I think art is just as and sometimes more important. What do you think that art offers us in terms of a way of knowing or a way of relating to the world around us that is unique?
I think science is just a different kind of art, and I
Mm,
think that we can only be whole when science and art walks hand in hand. I think I think that one of the purposes of artists is to communicate ideas, um, but also to imagine. I don't think you can be a scientist without an imagination, because if you are, then nothing changes. You're an algorithm, which is not the same thing. Um, I think our education system is flawed in the way that it separates arts and science out. Um, One thing that I've loved about the Lost Words is that many other arts have been drawn to it. We have the most beautiful film of a ballet dancer dancing to the music from the Lost Words Blessing. And that is just, I think, the best of human nature that I have ever seen anywhere. He's alone in a theatre because there can't be an audience, and it speaks such volumes. And the song, which was spun out from the Lost Words by the Spell Song singers, to see it danced by this man who almost seems to hang in the air is just astonishing. That really sings to the soul. I think not many people could watch that without being moved.
mm,
Um, and yeah, human nature, science, art, intermingled, bound up together. I think everything is much better when it's connected.
mm.
In the way that we are all connected to everything around us, and some people might wonder at the value of bees, but in a few hundred years' time, they won't make it that far. But if we didn't have them, they'd be hungry. It's the lack of understanding of the importance of each connection quite astonishes me. So yeah, art and science. I've forgotten the question. I'm all lost in the my head of being arty and sciencey at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it really sounds like, they each have their own values, but ultimately they can serve a similar purpose. And really, we all get the most when we communicate and learn from each other and when we marry these things together instead of keeping them
Yeah,
separate silos and never talking to
yeah.
each.
And when we work together as well, I think storytellers always used to be in government because they can help to they can help politicians to understand the problems. I think we are facing an emergency at the moment, that you can't just scare people into change, um, by saying, we are in the midst of the sixth mass extinction. I think you could add, we are probably the cause of the sixth mass extinction. Um, it is terrifying if you turn and face it, especially if you have children. But also, you can't just go, oh, it's too scary. I need to run away and hide and let somebody else deal with it. We need storytellers and scientists to work together to try and help people understand the state we're in and what we can do. Um, if we don't, do you not feel like we've all just been sent back to our rooms for a year to think about our bad behaviour? And our politicians have come out going, all right, we can just carry on now. It's like, what? uh, have you learnt nothing? Go back in there.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
love that analogy. Go back to
it's,
the room.
yeah, it's just, yeah, last chance, maybe.
Wonderful.
Um, Try and get it right this time.
Yep, and it takes all kinds. It takes everyone. Well,
Everyone working together.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We're coming up on the hour, so I wonder if before we close out, if I might be able to ask you to read one more one more poem from the book.
One more. Let's flip through this one. Now then, Moth. I love Moth. I think in certainly in the UK, people began to notice the thinning of species through the lack of insects. And I love this moth. When this arrived in my inbox, quite often Robert would send them with instructions as to where to read them. And he said, take this out into the twilight when the butterflies are leaving and the moths are coming, and read it to the sky and see if it works. So moth. This one soft word falls so far short of what the moth world means. Of moths in number, birthed by dark to flock round torch and lamp and porch, together thickening air to froth, then cloth, then weather. Open up this soft word's wings and outrush names and forms, a broth of colours, cinnabar and scarlet tiger, frosted green and angle shade, bordered pearl and tamarisk plume, diamondback and clouded silver. Thinner and thinner wears the cloth, however. Moths pass out of sight, beyond belief, their absence briefly noted, if at all, as distant memory, half-forgotten grief. Hold moth names in mouth and mind a while, satin lutestring, willow ermine, feathered thorn and seraphim, forester and dusty clearwing. Sing them out into the night to give moths back their range, their flight. Quite beautiful.
What a wonderful note to leave us on, and perhaps, oh, perhaps all 60 or so of us who've been here today might, as the spring approaches and the moths begin to flock in their colorful broth again, might we all bring some of their names to our mouths and witness them out in the dark this season. So I want to thank everybody for joining, especially big gratitude to you, Jackie, for joining us. It's been an absolute delight to have you and to hear from you. If any of you participants don't yet have a copy of Jackie's work, I'll be sharing in the follow-up email both Jackie's website and the website of House of Anansi Press, which published these books. And I'm gonna have to do the drawing of the name afterwards so that I can copy all the names of you all. I have everybody's email, and I'm gonna email you out whoever the winner is. So good luck, everybody. And Jackie, I actually just got one last question in the chat. Can I ask you one more
Yeah,
before
go
we?
on.
Okay. So someone's here with their daughter who's 14, and the parent is a scientist, and their daughter would like to be an illustrator. Do you have any advice for her?
I have advice for her. I would say follow your heart and learn and look as much as you can, and draw and draw and draw, and don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it. When I was at school, the one and only time I was taken into the headmaster's office was to be told that art was a hobby and not a profession. And recently I found myself on stage at the Albert Hall, which, if you're not in the UK, it's an immense building with an audience of 5,000 people. And I was painting on this stage, remembering what this headmaster had said to me.
So you
Art is
proved
good.
them wrong.
Huh?
You proved them wrong.
Well, I think there's a lot of people who work in the arts industry, and we don't blow our trumpets loud enough to how much we actually bring into the economy as well. We employ a lot of people through the power of our imaginations. And I would say, you know, that it's hard work, but if anything's worth doing, it's hard work. Yeah. My daughter is actually a scientist, an illustrator, and a writer, and a sailor. She's going for everything. She's doing everything.
You can really do it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Jackie.
Thank you.
Wishing you the best, and I will be saying some moth names this summer.
Yeah, they're beautiful. They're like poetry. They were named by artists and writers, the moths. That's why they read like a poem.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, take good care and stay wild, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.